What's up, everybody? Welcome to Moxie Bets, presented by Caesar Sportsbook. I'm Katie Mox. Today, we're talking NFL Week 13. I will share my picks for the Sunday slate, but first, we've got a special guest with us. We are going to court with our sports law attorney and professor, Dan Lust. He's also the host of Conduct Detrimental. I can't speak today. Dan, how are we doing?
We're good. We're good. It's always nice to be back on. I keep trying day by day to tell people that lawyers can be fun. We can have fun. So
Yes.
certainly happy to be with you and break down all things sports law and maybe a little bit gambling in here. We'll see if we can sneak it in.
Yeah, I know. You like to dabble a little bit in gambling.
Sure.
I'm so excited to talk to you. We were chit-chatting through DMs the other day about the Harbaugh stuff, and obviously we are going to get into that, and I can't wait to hear your take on it. But before we do, I mean, this is a big week for me, Dan. This is week 13. This is 49ers taking on the Eagles. It is an emotional game for fans and players alike. As you know, NFC Championship game last year, Brock Purdy gets injured within the first quarter, the first couple plays of the game. And then it was just a disaster from there. Nobody could throw the ball. We actually had the backup quarterback also get a concussion and get out. Brock Purdy comes back in. All we can do is really run the ball. Defense is out there the whole time. They lose the game by a lot. Niners are favored -2.5. I believe this line has actually gone up to 3 at Philly. It's interesting because Philly is a 10-1 team. It's like only like the second or third time, I think, in history that a 10-1 team has been an underdog. Curious your thoughts of this game, because I feel like, the Philadelphia fan base and team wants to be like, hey, y'all want to complain about losing the quarterback. We were going to beat you anyways. And that's what's going to happen. And then the 49ers team are like, hey, it wasn't a fair fight. We didn't have a quarterback. Now you get to see the real team. I'm obviously heavily invested in this as a 49ers fan, but what's your take on the game?
I think you're in the midst of the bird gauntlet. I've been seeing this on social media.
Oh,
Yeah, the
yes.
bird gauntlet.
With the Hawks. Yep.
Yeah, no. There's a thing. I think, but yeah, I'm into this bird gauntlet. But I am I guess a struggling Buffalo Bills fan. So I've been a
Oh, what a
recent
struggle.
victim of the Eagles being severely outgained, severely outplayed, and still coming
Yes.
away with a narrow victory. So I'm a big fan of the 49ers. I am. You can see
Yeah.
behind me, I have a lot of San Francisco paraphernalia
Yes.
with my Giants. So I support the Niners. But at this point, I have a really hard time betting against the Eagles, where they just find a way to win these bad games. All the advanced analytics will tell you that they should bet against them, fade the Eagles. But then at the end of the day, Jalen Hurts is there and
Yeah.
getting the post game interview. So I think this game might be a stay away. I'm sorry, Katie. I'm
No,
very
I
nervous.
don't blame you for it being a stay away, because there is, I mean, I feel like it's a classic letdown spot for the Eagles, but I know a lot of Eagles fans felt like last weekend was the classic letdown spot, right? That
Could
you
have
just,
been.
the emotional win off of the Chiefs, then you got the Bills and you think you're looking ahead to this 49ers game. And like you said, the Eagles have been phenomenal. Second, two times in the last 2 weeks, they have been at a deficit going into the half. And it seems like no points is too many for them to overcome. And yeah, Jalen Hurts, when you need him to be clutch, he is. Unfortunately, Josh Allen, when you need him to be clutch, is not. And I don't know
True.
if I'm just like a long-standing Josh Allen apologist, but I just feel bad for him. And yes, he threw that interception, which what could have sealed the deal in the game, and instead it went back and then to overtime, and then they couldn't get it done. And yet, and the officiating though, like that horse collar was,
Horse collar, the
yes,
AJ Brown fumble, the
yes,
the Stephon Diggs pass interference, a lot of things. But as a Bills fan, and I've been a Bills fan, dating back to JP Lozman and Rob Johnson and Doug Flutie, this whole terrible era. Josh Allen's obviously the best quarterback of the bunch, but on paper, Josh Allen was 0-6 in overtime, and they changed the rules to benefit Josh
I
Allen, and he's
know.
still 0-6. So you can only make so many excuses. But Katie, I'll say this, and this might be a little controversial. The Eagles, if you just look at the yardages, right, they're a team that should be losing these games, and somehow they're
Yes,
eking them out.
yes,
We had a lot of fun, at least in my circle, saying like, obviously fade the Vikings when they get to the playoffs because that point differential is
yes.
actually indicative of the true total. There's a reading of the situation where the Eagles will fly back down to earth in rapid fashion. So I'm
Yeah,
just like, I don't want to bet against the Eagles because I keep losing money, but like
I
at
I
some
get it.
point it's going to correct itself. It has to.
I love this because I was on a podcast last night, sports gambling podcast with my friends Sean and Ryan. And Sean is a big Eagles fan, and I said too, are the Eagles the Vikings of the
Look at this.
2023
Look at these
season?
great minds.
So
Yes.
many single score games. They're outgained by the last 4 games. They've been outgained by almost 100 yards per game. The
Right.
luck that they are getting, and it's not to say that they, that they aren't coming back and winning games and they just won't die, and I get it, but, like, yeah, the Vikings were a first round bounce out last year.
Mhm.
I don't know that I could say that Philly's a first round bounce out, but I don't think they're on their way back to the Super Bowl because you gotta get through San Francisco, baby. Speaking of Dallas, Detroit, SF, and Philly, all favorites to win the NFC. Which of these teams do you think wins the conference after what you just said about Philadelphia?
I like San Francisco. I mean,
Come
like,
on.
what was their over under before the season started? Like 12.5, and everyone was betting against Brock Purdy. And
Yes.
other than that weird 3-week stretch without Debo, the San
Yeah.
Francisco's been the best team in the NFL. So,
Yeah.
on paper, record wise, and they demolished the Jaguars in that 3.5 point game where there was like a
Yes.
slight question of whether
Yes.
the 49ers were legit. So, the eye test tells me the Niners with a healthy Debo and a healthy Brock Purdy. So, we'll
I
see.
love it. Yeah, if they can stay healthy for sure. And Trent Williams, obviously very important on
Mhm.
the O line. Well, this is music to my ears. I love it, Dan. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we are going to preview some sports law situations that are happening. Stick around. Why should you bet with Caesars Sportsbook? 2 words, Caesars Rewards. Every bet brings you closer to the type of benefits only Caesars can offer. Hotel stays, VIP experiences, sports and concert tickets, and more. It's not just an app, it's an empire. Welcome back to Moxie Bets, presented by Caesars Sportsbook. Here with our attorney, friend, sports law attorney, and also Professor Dan Lust. Dan, Jim Harbaugh is free finally. And look, the Wolverines have been absolutely amazing. They won despite all of this situation. What can you tell us about what is going on with Harbaugh in Michigan right now?
It's really interesting, and I want people to play the long game here, right? We've had in the history of sports these perceived cheaters, be it the Patriots and the Astros, while mired in the midst of controversy, go all the way to win those championships. And as they say in sports, right, flags fly forever. Um, I think it's important here. The Big Ten had a battle against Michigan. It was not the NCAA against Michigan, and certainly we can talk about the sign stealing saga.
Right.
We just finished, and I think the Big Ten and the Michigan, I'm going to call it a civil war, right? Conference versus a school within their conference. We have yet to see the actual war. And I think that's between Michigan and the NCAA. That's the one that this longer investigation where
Right.
players are being interviewed, coaches are being interviewed, where you could have scholarships, a USC type suspension, God forbid, an SMU type discipline scenario. So we that's what's on the table with the NCAA. The
Right.
Big Ten certainly wasn't going to do that to itself.
No, and that's the thing. I mean, when you think about someone like Jim Harbaugh and this NCAA ruling that is pending, a lot of talk of him ditching out, pulling a Pete Carroll, if you will, and
Mhm.
getting out before the hammer comes down at him. Where do you see Jim Harbaugh next year? Do you see him with Michigan? Do you see him with the Chicago Bears, which is where I would like him to be? But what do you think happens with Harbaugh?
So Harbaugh, in what is a short season, Harbaugh has been suspended for 6 games in what is
Yeah,
otherwise a short season. 3 were self-imposed at the beginning of the year, which some people forget, and 3 were imposed by the Big Ten.
yeah,
So obviously that has not impacted Michigan's winning ways. I've seen the whispers of Harbaugh being, maybe on the way to the NFL, but let's just take the USC. I think that's probably the closest comparison
yeah.
here. And Pete Carroll saw what was happening, the loss of scholarships, and that's when Lane Kiffin and Coach O were kind of poking around the USC bandwagon. Um, I think Harbaugh has all the incentive to leave the program at this point. I mean, I'm sensing that there's some real punishment coming on the other end here. And I think part of this, if you're trying to read the tea leaves on what's going to happen to Michigan, if we're just trying to use facts and what has happened and, using our legal brains here, the Big Ten and Michigan were gearing up for a really big fight in court. Michigan University filed what was called a temporary restraining order to try to get Harbaugh back on the field. That was after that Penn State game, so he could coach against Maryland and Ohio State. And then all of a sudden, we were gearing up for this big battle. And then on Thursday, the day before this hearing in court, Michigan and the Big Ten just settle up and they go, you know what? Even though we paid all these lawyers and we had spent all these billable hours to file this temporary restraining order, Harbaugh's actually not going to be on the sidelines. And now the Big Ten and Michigan, we're aligned. Why on
Yep.
earth would Michigan try to fight this for 5 days and then
Mhm.
just give up at the 11th hour? It's because they need the Big Ten if the NCAA is going to come knocking on their door. And I
Right.
think I would expect at this stage, from what we're hearing about, NCAA being on campus and interviewing players and coaches, that there is something larger afoot. And if the NCAA wants to have any teeth in this NIL era, which I think we're going to talk about more, they have
Yeah.
really had no sense of punishment or enforcement relating to NIL stuff and really
Right.
strategic stuff since really July 1st of 21. I think the NCAA is gearing up for something big, and to make an example of Michigan, who right now is marching towards the national championship game. So it's a big target on their back.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if he jumped ships. But speaking of NIL deals, Harbaugh said that he would give up, which I don't know if he really would, part of his salary to the players if the NCAA and NIL rules allowed it. Do you think he would actually do that? And can he do that? Like what? To me, that just seems like a PR. Like, oh, but I'm really a nice guy and I care about my players.
Well, okay. Why you can't do it is because Harbaugh is an employee of the university. So if the school cut Harbaugh a check and then Harbaugh gave part of that check to the players, it's very close to what we would consider maybe an employer-employee relationship vis-a-vis Michigan indirectly paying the players, which you can't do under current NCAA rules. So, yeah, I mean, maybe it makes Harbaugh look good, and maybe he's trying to get ahead of some type of punishment or suspension. But they also self-imposed a 3-game suspension on himself for the first 3 games of this season, and we ended up in this scenario. So I'm not sure I buy it, but it speaks to a larger question in NCAA rules. Like, Harbaugh and obviously a lot of news in college coaching circles about coaches getting fired and having this dead money on the books and getting paid
Yeah.
to sit on their couches. Like, if the NCAA and schools are okay dishing out tens of millions of dollars for coaches to do nothing,
Yeah.
and that money is literally being lit on fire, I'm okay with that money going to the players. Like,
Right.
that seems like something we should be analyzing here. Something doesn't make sense if you're just lighting money on fire. Meanwhile, you can't pay the players any portion of that money. It seems at odds with each other.
It does seem at odds with each other. And also, it's Michigan versus everybody. Do you think Michigan wins the title this year?
Oh man, it's really Michigan versus Georgia. I mean, the question is,
Yeah.
last year, in the midst of the, I'm going to put it in quotes, alleged sign stealing scandal, they got embarrassed by TCU on the grand stage, right? So that was in the midst of the sign stealing saga, and
Right.
Michigan certainly is not going to be wading into those waters of getting any type of gray area competitive advantages. So we've yet to see. Obviously, Michigan has overcome the Ohio State, monkey on their back. But we
Yes.
haven't really seen them in the college football playoff really rise to that occasion. TCU was a inferior opponent. Michigan had a huge advantage on that spread and lost outright.
Yeah.
While Ohio State had a really good showing against Georgia. So
Yeah.
on paper, if Ohio State can match up against Georgia, and Michigan beat Ohio State last year, you would think that Michigan is capable of doing it. And I'll say this, Katie, I don't know what the current odds are for Michigan, but Michigan has risen to the occasion, beating Penn State, beating Ohio State in those meaningful games. So I think it's a good bet this year that Michigan on paper, just like I told you, like when all the daggers were going after the Patriots and the Astros, like those guys rose to the occasion here. And this might be a team of destiny that is Michigan. So I'm not scared about the controversy. I think if anything, they've rallied together. Let's Michigan
Yeah.
against the world, Michigan against everyone. I'm not sure. I'm
Yeah.
not sure I buy it generally, but this year there seems to be something to that.
Well, and as somebody who knows Harbaugh, being from the Bay Area, seeing him at Stanford and then also coaching the 49ers, he absolutely thrives in toxic environments. And the more drama that he can kind of, come up with, the better his teams do. He likes that us versus the world. Who's got it better than us? Nobody. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Another big thing happening in CFB, Deion Sanders lost 3 recruits who had committed to Colorado. He's now called out the NCAA for allowing players to visit other schools after committing. To me, it sounds kind of interesting coming from him, considering the transfer portal was such a big thing with him, certainly at Jackson State, and then bringing over to Colorado. And recruiting is really the strongest thing that he had going for him at Colorado. So it's kind of funny for him to call out what is essentially his biggest selling point for himself and players committing to Colorado. But what's your take on this?
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of headlines like, did Deion Sanders' comments cost him 3 top recruits? And it's like, well, what happened on Saturday and Sunday? Like, the
They're
college
not
football
winning.
season
Yeah.
ended and Colorado did really badly and got really embarrassed in that late stages of the season. So, yeah, I guess Deion Sanders really in a nutshell, if he's saying that the NCAA should change the rules, if a player commits that there should be some ramifications, that they shouldn't be able to make official visits to other schools, which in a vacuum, I actually don't have a problem with. What otherwise is the incentive to signing on the dotted line if it doesn't mean anything? So I think Deion's comments were kind of ill-timed, but it's the same guy, Deion Sanders, that got the job at Colorado and then did a speech to the entire, pre-existing Colorado roster and basically said, most of you guys aren't going to be here, which like at the time I thought was a pretty dumb thing to say to, a big room of students, some of which could be helpful, but who are we to question, Deion's tactics in terms of like recruitment and whatnot? The loss of 3 players doesn't really mean that they've, essentially not going to be at Colorado, but they've decommitted to keep their options open. So, yeah, I don't think we can question Deion's recruitment tactics.
No.
Yeah, I think a lot of them, quote unquote, decommitting was because of Colorado's poor performance, independent of
Yes.
anything that Deion said.
Yes, the Colorado at the beginning of the season versus Colorado at the end
Right.
of the season were 2 entirely different
Right.
teams and hype trains, and I think maybe some kids bought into the hype in the beginning of the season, but then towards the end, they're like, maybe this isn't gonna be the best for me." Do you think that this, um, is fair for players to do? And also, do you think it's, like, NIL related?
Let me think. I mean, NIL really, and in a nutshell, we have to kind of talk about and parse two things together. So, like for example, NIL is really supposed to be third party marketing deals and like the collectives and everyone paying these different organizations. Unless you have signed something that's real teeth to signing a letter of commitment, like you can really play your options out on the field. You can have conversations with the collectives. You can take official visits. You can put your arm around a player and just say we'll take care of you. So I certainly think this is NIL related because as long as you can still make official visits, people can still make, indirect or direct promises to you. Not that that's okay under NCAA rules, but we have to face the reality of what's happening. But I do think that NIL, it's a real incentive, right? Under the NCAA rules, a player can't be offered a specific inducement to transfer from one school to another. But then there's the reality of like what's happening, right? $100 handshakes they used to call back in the day. So I do think it's NIL related, but I certainly don't have a problem with players keeping their options open. But to Deion's point, if there is a real ramification for signing a letter of intent, like there has to be some teeth to it. If guys can just keep going on official visits, and I think as Deion put it, like cheating on your girlfriend, like why even have the signing in the first place? So I think Deion's right that there's something in the rules, but for us, and I imagine you're on the same page as I am, like player empowerment, right? If players can make their
Yeah.
money, so be it. And if the rules allow these players to do it currently, I don't have an issue with it. And if the rules do change as Deion is proposing, then I'll have an issue with players violating the rules. But right now, there's no ramifications to violating them. So be it.
So you're saying that in the future, you could understand if maybe the commitments reflect that of, like, a contract?
Yeah. I mean, I guess there's a legal issue in terms of restricting players' movement based on contract law because right now players are not really. They're not like employer-employee relationship. It's not like the NBA and you're a player on a particular team. It's this loose kind of sense. I can't even call them independent contractors. They're student athletes. But as we start marching closer, and there's a lot of cases that are identifying potentially athletes as being employees. Right now, Dartmouth basketball has a petition to try to get recognized as a union. Dartmouth's basketball team. Yeah,
That's
I mean,
interesting.
and if that happens, what is the domino effect across sports? So this question
Yeah.
about like how much control can schools have over players? We're
Mhm.
getting closer to it. They're getting closer to players being recognized potentially as a
Good.
union or being able to bargain against their school. All very new concepts. So you're touching on something that is really kind of at the precipice in this kind of college sports law world.
Well, and that kinda brings me to this NIL class action suit. It
Mhm.
could be $4 billion, Dan. Would this end the NCAA?
We got to check the NCAA's books here. Yeah, so I guess you're over in California, so this kind of speaks to you. There's a judge in the Ninth Circuit by the name of Claudia Wilkin. She's dealt with the Ed O'Bannon video game case. She had that Alston case that went to the Supreme Court, and now she's got this House versus NCAA case. So it's a case that, I guess, for lack of a better term, it's the definition of what NIL is. So I told you it was kind of third-party marketing contracts. It's like it's not the school paying the players. It's
Yeah.
not the conference paying the players or the NCAA paying the players. It's third parties, so like Nike, Gatorade, or even like a collective paying the athletes. This lawsuit basically says, well, we think that NIL should also include broadcast revenue and other concepts where schools are using the player's name, image, and likeness to churn a profit. So you and I watch a lot of college sports. If you watch March Madness, right, it certainly says the name of the player. It has their images. You're
Yes.
using their likeness to
Yes.
turn a
Yes.
profit. That in outside of sports, that would be considered name, image, and likeness, but sports doesn't consider that. So, Katie, what happened somewhat recently? That case, a case called House versus NCAA, now in the over in California. That question of what should we consider NIL to be, and should we award these athletes back pay for broadcast revenue that
Yeah.
was earned previously off of their name, image, and likeness?
Mm.
And now those handful of athletes were given class action certification status with respect to damages. So that
Wow.
4 billion number is really multiplying all the athletes out over a number of years and multiplying out by their number of damages. So 4 billion It's a potential number. Obviously, there's a lot of mechanism. The NCAA has to lose the case. But yeah, 4 billion is a huge number. And I'm not certain that the NCAA has that in reserves. Maybe they do, but I don't think we know that.
Well, I think the exploitation that's happened for college athletes, since the beginning of time is just gigantic. I'm glad that now there's NIL deals that they can make money. But yeah, going back to it, some of these kids never go and make it pro, but were superstars in college and don't have anything to show for it. And we know that, especially with the way that they're redirecting all of these conferences, these kids are going to be traveling way more than they're going to be in school. It's going to be nearly impossible for them to complete their schoolwork and to study for their tests and do all that stuff, because they're gonna be flying all around the country. They're not even confining them to a certain area anymore. And then to not have them be able to, get paid and stuff. It's, again, I think it's just exploitation. So I'll be interested to see what happens. And I'm on the side of the kids, man.
Do it for the kids. Yeah. I mean, you hit on, like, Big Ten now is playing in 3 different time zones. ACC is going to have that as well. It's tricky for the NCAA and schools to say that we don't control the athletes so much. Like, we don't control them, but we're making a lot of money off them. Therefore,
Yes.
then it's a really
They're not
difficult
there
question.
for school. They don't
They're not.
care how they do in school.
Katie, how about
Yeah.
the one and done rule? We have players
Yeah.
that play 1 year in college
Yes.
basketball and they go to the pros. They're not there to get an education. They're
No.
there to get a platform
Well, and
in order to make money at the next
even
level.
the institutions of education don't care that these kids graduate or how they do in school, really. They just want them to play.
It's true. I mean, that's the honest to God truth. And now that you have, pathway programs, be it G League, or you can go overseas and play in Australia like LaMelo Ball did, you don't need a 4-year education.
Yeah.
The other side of that, Katie, just very briefly, you're having players really at the, that are maybe going to be projected as 4th round picks or 3rd round picks or maybe 2nd round picks in the NBA, who are staying that extra year in college to make that 7-figure kind of NIL payday. So those kind of back end guys that might, have to go play overseas if they can't cut it on an NBA bench, they're getting another year of big payment in a major college campus. So there are kind of 2 sides to NIL. I kind of like it, like the Shane Corums of the world over
Yeah.
at Michigan, staying that extra year because he's getting paid.
Yeah.
So I do see that NIL is helping the collegiate landscape in that sense, but it is, definitely a layered conversation.
Yeah, it's brand new, so it needs to have some more time, get some more restrictions and stuff on it. But I do think that kids deserve to make money off of their own likeliness, considering that these schools and broadcast companies are making so much money off of these kids. One more thing I want to get into, and it's happening in the NBA. James Dolan of MSG and the Knicks and the Rangers is stepping away from the NBA Board of Governors amid suing the Raptors. Now, the Knicks suing the Raptors is an unprecedented lawsuit. It seems there's so many different layers to this. So why don't you just walk me through what's happening here and kind of what you think of what's going and how this will turn out?
Yes, I would say unprecedented is fair. As you know, I teach a sports law class, and I had my students on kind of like a mock trial situation, arguing for the Knicks and the Raptors and whether this case should get moved out of court into arbitration. But
Oh,
I guess it's an interesting case. I guess where it gets started is something that I think everyone will understand. You're working for one employer, and another employer in the same field starts to recruit you. So the question is, like, can you email yourself documents from your current employer and maybe use them for your new employer? Maybe that would be helpful, right?
but
Um,
everybody does that.
Everybody does that, but probably most employment contracts tell you that you can't do that, and they can
Yeah,
hold you in breach and come after you and sue you. Not sure how many people do it, but I
right.
imagine most employment contracts will view that as proprietary information, a trade secret. So what's alleged to have happened here, and we'll paint in broad brushstrokes, but a staffer with the Knicks, I'm probably going to botch his name, but I think it's Ike Azatam.
Okay.
Worked for the Knicks for a couple years, worked his way up through the front office, then makes the move from the Knicks to the Raptors. But for a period of time, he's working for the Knicks and he's getting courted by the Raptors. So what's being alleged is that this guy,
Oh,
right?
okay.
This is the interesting part.
Yeah.
Ike Azatam, on his way out the door, right? He's putting in his notice. My last day is going to be X.
Uh-huh.
Starts emailing himself a lot of stuff. That's what the allegations here, to his personal account.
And do we know what he was emailing
I
himself?
think this was access to, scouting reports, player profiles that were proprietary to the
Oh,
Knicks and
yeah.
being shared with the Raptors. And according to
Yeah.
this complaint filed in New York federal court, home state for the Knicks,
Yeah.
is that these are proprietary trade secrets, trade information. And then I guess according to the Knicks, they had information that this login information, the credentials for Ike Azetem to the Knicks software was being accessed an incredible amount of times in this interim period.
Well, why
And I
wouldn't
think
you just sue Ike? Ike is the one doing this, not the Raptors. Or is they're saying that the Raptors were telling him to do this?
yes, that might have been some inducement, or that he's giving them the password and they're accessing it, because
Oh,
I think the implication is the frequency of logins. And I'm not sure if it says this in the complaint, but I'm sure you could tell kind of the geolocation of where someone's logging in. So let's say all of a sudden there's a lot of
in Toronto?
Canadian logins,
Yeah.
Toronto logins. That looks pretty bad. So yeah, I mean, the question, Katie, which makes this somewhat unprecedented, the NBA Constitution says that disputes between two teams should really be decided at NBA arbitration by Silver behind the scenes. But what's being alleged here is that, and by the Knicks and Dolan's, like, this can't go to NBA arbitration because Silver is going to certainly be biased towards making sure the Raptors don't get in trouble here. So let's litigate this in open court. It's a trade secret. It's any other employer and employee relationship. It would go to court. There's precedent for that being decided, and this has never happened in NBA circles. So there is no precedent for it to go to arbitration. Let's have this in open court for the world to see. Let's put the Toronto Raptors on blast in front of everybody, which I'm here for the drama. I'm certainly here for the drama.
Signing right up. Signing
Yeah,
right up.
of course.
That's so interesting. James Dolan, do you think they have any legs in this case?
I mean, assuming what to be true, assuming what the Knicks are saying is true, I mean, it makes the Raptors look really bad. If anything, it puts more pressure on Adam Silver to really punish the Raptors in a substantial way. If this was just filed as a private NBA grievance, and it was decided by Silver confidentially, maybe the Raptors get a slap on the wrist. But the fact that this was put into open court, and James Dolan is now stepping down from different NBA boards because of this alleged
Right. It's
perceived
yeah,
conflict of
he's
interest.
stepping down because the case isn't going the way that he thought it would, or why do you think he's stepping down?
It's somewhat vague, but I think he's doing it to bring more attention to this case. Like, I don't think this is fair. I hope the
I didn't
Raptors.
know about it until he stepped down.
This is something. This is like the Streisand effect. Like, he's bringing extra attention to this case. If that's his goal, mission accomplished, because we're talking about this case because it was filed in open court, because it is an unprecedented lawsuit, because of this question of Adam Silver's bias and James Dolan stepping down. So if I think we can criticize Dolan fairly in the media for doing a lot of things wrong, but if his goal here was to get a lot of attention on this case and really put the pressure on the NBA and Silver to punish the Raptors, he's doing an effective job at that.
I love it. Dan, thank you so much for joining us today and talking about all of this. Again, his podcast is Conduct Detrimental. Said it right this time. Talk to us about the podcast and what people can get from it, because, if you're interested in sports law, Dan Lust is the guy, and this podcast is really, really informational and fun.
It is very fun. So, we talk about all things at the intersection. We've talked about the Michigan sign stealing for a while. You and I didn't talk about it. SGA, Oklahoma City guard, is involved in this weird nullification of his
What
house.
about the Josh Giddey stuff, by the way?
Giddey
That's
stuff
also,
is interesting.
yeah.
We try to cover everything sports and law. So people pay attention to sports business a lot, but sports law is like, we're right there. We're just as important. Just gotta show us some love over here, for sure.
Yes, and I do feel like there's so much going on in sports law over the last couple of years. It just gets more and more. I would be interested to hear more about the Josh Giddey situation. So hopefully y'all talk about that. Obviously extremely sensitive, but I do know that a police investigation has now started on it. And yes, there's a lot to get to. So make sure you follow Dan at Sports Law Lust, and also the Conduct Detrimental podcast. Let people know where else to find you.
I'm a professional. So, Katie, you don't know this, but my main platform is LinkedIn. I got a big following on LinkedIn. Dan Lust, ESQ.
I'm not surprised, actually.
That's where the lawyers hang out. We hang out on nerd places
lawyers
like
hang
LinkedIn.
out. Yeah, if you're interested in sports law, go ahead and check him out too, because he could be your professor. Dan, thank you so much for joining us. We'll talk to you soon.
My pleasure.
What's up, guys? Back here on Moxie Bets with just me, presented by Caesar Sportsbook. Thank you so much to Jan for joining us, but it's now time for me to share my top NFL Week 13 picks. First up is a total bet. I'm looking at the Jets and the Falcons under 34. Yes, it is a low total, but the Jets offense is hard to watch, guys. It is very hard to watch, even harder with Tim Boyle under center. The only way that New York wins this game or even scores is probably from their defense or special teams. And while the Falcons offense can be good, you just don't know who's going to show up on a given week. So I think this is going to be a defensive battle. They're both two serviceable defenses. So give me that under 34. I can see this being like a 14 to 10 game, 13 to 10 game. So very, very low scoring. Next up for a money line or against the spread, I'm taking the dogs in the Cardinals plus 5.5 versus the Steelers. This line just feels like a little bit of an overreaction to the Steelers finally having a 400 total yard of offense game. The Cardinals, of course, got blown out by the Rams. But if we look at history, guys, the Cardinals always lose to the Rams. Kyler Murray's just 1-7 in his career against LA. This line opened up at 3.5. The fact that it's moved 2 whole points is way too many for me to trust this Steelers offense to cover. So give me the Cardinals plus 5.5. Next up, we're going to get things propping here. I got to go to my 49ers. Give me Kittle alternate receptions at 5+. You can find this at plus 122. It's not on Caesars this morning. It might be a little bit later because his line right now is at 3.5, and that over is minus 152. So shop around, see where you can find an alt line. I do like this 5+. The Eagles are 32nd in DVOA defending tight ends this season, giving up about 6 catches per game and 48 yards to tight ends. If we look back to some of the top tight ends this season that the Eagles have played, TJ Hawkinson, Jake Ferguson, and Kelsey all caught 7 receptions. Kittle also enters week 13 as the most efficient receiving tight end in the NFL, averaging more yards per route run than any other tight end. So get Kittle at the alternate receptions at plus 5. A game that I'm definitely staying away from. It's the Dolphins of the Commanders 9.5-point spread. Yes, the Dolphins should absolutely cover this, but I worry that they're going to be looking ahead to the playoffs, maybe reserving some of their guys. They might get out into a lead and then just back off, and the Commanders could get a little bit of a backdoor cover here. So I'm laying off of that game. For Mox Locks, you already know it. Give me the Niners -3. You can find it -2.5 in the market still. Go ahead and grab that number if you can find it. Look, in games where the offense is completely healthy, the Niners are 8-0 with an average margin of victory of more than 20 points. So that is covering this spread. The only win that they had that was a single score win was versus the Rams. And that's when Sean McVay decided to kick that meaningless field goal and ruin the cover for a lot of us. Eagles are 19th against the pass and are trending downward. Niners offense number 1 in DVOA, number 1 in the passing game. This one could get ugly. A lot of revenge spots. I know that the public's going to be all over the Eagles 10-1 catching the points here, but I think the Niners win and make a big, big statement. And when we look at Thursday night game, which is the Cowboys and the Seahawks, Cowboys are laying 9, this total 47.5. I'm going to fade Dak Prescott here, take him under 283.5 pass yards. It's at -113. And I know it seems kind of crazy because he's really been lights out, averaging over 300 passing yards per game since week 6. But 280, what is it now? 283.5 passing yards is a really big number on a short week. They just came off of probably their biggest game of the season. We do know that Jerry Jones loves the Thanksgiving games, and Seattle runs a lot of zone defense, actually the second most in the NFL on passing downs. Prescott versus zone coverage, just not as efficient as man coverage. If you look at some teams who are pretty zone heavy defenses, the Niners, the Panthers, and the Cardinals, he went well under this mark. He only got over 200 passing yards in one time of those 3 games. So it doesn't feel good to do, but fading Dak tonight, I think, is the play under 283.5 passing yards. This has been Moxie Bets presented by Caesar Sportsbook. Don't forget to follow us on social and tweet us your questions. Maybe we will answer them on our show. Follow us on social as well at Moxie Bets. Good luck with your bets, and we'll see you next time.